Hello and welcome, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you to today's Alta Live. We are going to discuss an extraordinary and unlikely rescue in California's Trinity Alps. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor. Today, we are joined by Julian Smith, who wrote about this rescue for Alta Journal and the story, Miracle on the Mountain. He's joined with Lieutenant Commander Derek Schramel. Derek led the rescue effort. If you haven't already, I really encourage you to read this heart thumper of a story. I read it again last night and had trouble going to sleep. My heart was beating. I knew what happened, and it's just a roller coaster. Here's a little bit about today's guest. Julian Smith writes about science, history, and adventure for Esquire, Wired, Smithsonian, Outside, Alta Journal, and other publications. His most recent book, Aloha Rodeo, 3 Hawaiian Cowboys, the World's Greatest Rodeo, and a Hidden History of the American West, won the 2020 Oregon Book Award and is one of NPR's 100 Best Books. Lieutenant Commander Derek Schramel was born and raised in California, one of the many reasons why we love him. He's a 16-year veteran of the United States Coast Guard. He has served throughout the country, including at the Coast Guard Air Station LA and the Coast Guard Sector Humboldt Bay in McKinleyville, California. It is at that station where this extraordinary rescue started from. For that rescue, he and his team were awarded the prestigious Distinguished Flying Cross for their work. He's presently at the Advanced Helicopter Rescue School, an instructor at the Coast Guard's Aviation Training Center in Mobile, Alabama, where he lives with his wife and 2 sons. Before we dive into this story, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live, where you are right now, is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. You can get this beautiful magazine for $50 a year, or join us with a digital subscription for just $3 a month. We do events like this. We host a California book club. If you've been considering subscribing, I really hope you'll join us as a member. We make a great Christmas gift for your California expats. Send them Alta. I'll include a link to how to join us at Alta if you're open to that. Thank you. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions for our guests. We're going to chat for about 30 minutes and then get to as many of your questions as we can. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com. We're also going to send you links to the interview, Julian's incredible story, anything else that pops up today. So with that rigmarole, welcome, gentlemen. I am here in Novato, California. Derek, where are you today?
I'm at my house in Mobile, Alabama.
Welcome. And Julian, where are you?
I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us, both from out of the Golden State. Julian, this is your article. So I'm going to start with you. Can you give us kind of the abbreviated version of how you came to hear about this rescue that took place in September of 2019, and why you decided to write about it?
Yeah, well, about 3 years ago, I wrote about a different Coast Guard rescue team who was operating in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. And that was a whole amazing week-long saga story on its own. And so I got to know the guys through writing that. I met a few of them, and I kept asking them, like, hey, you know, any other good stories? And all of them, after a little bit of thought, they said, you got to talk to these guys. This is the one, the firefighter rescue. Yeah, so then I reached out, and yeah, I mean, firefighting is also kind of dear to my heart. My second book was about smoke jumpers that work for the Forest Service, so it kind of put the 2 things together. And yeah, once you get in touch with these guys, you almost can't get them to stop talking, which is great as a writer.
So this story is pretty incredible. Derek has given me permission to call him Derek. Thank you, sir. Yeah, can you kind of give us a rundown of what happened on the night you get the call? What happened? 2 firefighters, 2 independent contractor firefighters were trapped in the Trinity Alps. How did this become your problem?
Yeah, so we were on duty. Coast Guard usually has it for their air stations, 1 crew's on duty for 24 hours. So it was our duty day. And we got a call right after we had landed from a training flight about 2 injured firefighters that were about 60 miles inland of our unit. So it was kind of surprising to get that sort of call because it's pretty uncommon for us to go and do that sort of mission. So we kind of met up, went to the command center, and they gave us the details. And 2 firefighters had been hit by a boulder that had rolled down a hill. And we knew one of them had hurt their back and their neck, and one had a fractured femur. So from that point, we quickly kind of discussed it, talked to our bosses, because I can't just take off on my own for the most part for that sort of mission, and got the okay to take off on it.
I'm going to move to you, Julian. Derek, there's a little bit of an echo. Are you open on 2 screens, and can you close one of them?
Yeah, let me see.
Julian, so what exactly happened? What, they're independent contractor firefighters who were at work? These are people who are called in by whom?
By the Forest Service in this case. When they don't have enough manpower, they'll call in teams like this. They work for a private company. And yeah, so as needed, they'll call in these guys and they'll go up and do their best to keep things from getting worse. But these are incredibly hazardous conditions, especially in places like the Alps, the Trinity Alps, where it's just incredibly steep, loose rocks. Once everything starts burning down, then you get falling trees. You get tree branches falling on you, wind from the flames. It's really hard to imagine a tougher environment just on the ground, let alone up in the air.
Why was this, Derek, I guess this is a question for you. Why was this a Coast Guard job? I would imagine that there were a number of other, you're trained for water rescues, things on the coast. What are you doing in the Alps? Why was this, it seems like, you know, in Julian's article that you were kind of the only option. Why was that?
Yeah, so I think we're the only option. If you've ever been up to, they call it the Lost Coast up there in Northern California, and there's just not a lot of different rescue agencies. And most of the aircraft that are dedicated to the firefighting mission, you know, they kind of focus on firefighting and not so much. They do rescues also, but most of the time not at night. And they called a couple other agencies that specialize in inland stuff that night, but just due to the risk, they weren't up for it. You know, we do train at night a lot with night vision goggles and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we don't train up in the mountains a lot, or, you know, in the vicinity of a fire, but we thought we could at least, you know, try and see if we could get it done, because there wasn't anybody else that was going to do it.
And you had a crew, you were the leader of a crew of 4 in a helicopter at night in the mountains in a fire. Had you ever experienced any, that seems like a lot of variables to deal with, especially rescuing 2, what do we call victims, who you have kind of not a lot of data on them. How do you just hop in a helicopter and go and figure it out?
No, so we call them survivors, but so yeah, we do a pretty extensive, we call it a risk management discussion, and it's basically we try to identify, you know, any risk that would be, which obviously there was a lot of risk. This was categorized as a high risk mission. So the only way we can really justify going out on it is if there's a high gain to the mission. Whereas there's a good chance that we could save people's lives, because we're allowed to assume a lot of risk if we have reasonable, you know, beyond reasonable doubt that we're able to help these people. So that was kind of how we decided, is we'd at least go out there, kind of assess the situation and see if we were able to do it. So that's kind of how we got going on the road. And then obviously my commanding officer and ops boss have to sign off on it too. And after a good discussion with them, and after we gave them our plan, they let us go.
Had you ever flown a helicopter in a fire before?
Nope.
And so, Julian, you mentioned this a little bit in your article. It changes the air. I don't know anything about flying a helicopter, but flying in fire makes it more difficult than not flying in fire, presumably. Why is that? How did you have to kind of navigate that and work around that?
So that was the difficult part for many reasons. One, it changes kind of the characteristic of the airflow and stuff. So when the fire is burning, it's really hot, and hot air wants to rise really fast. So just flying over the fire made it very difficult to kind of keep the aircraft in a stable, profile. Not only was the air very turbulent because of that hot air, it was really hard to see anything because at night we depend on our night vision goggles a lot. And if you watched any movies about night vision goggles and people flipping a light switch on when they have night vision goggles on and it being very bright and blinding you, it was kind of the same with the fire. Anytime we looked at the fire with our night vision goggles, it would blur those goggles out and make them so they weren't very effective. So it was really challenging in that regard as well, because it was hard to see anything through our night vision goggles.
At one point during this rescue, you had to refuel. One of your teammates had gone down, connected with the two survivors and their fellow firefighters who were kind of staying with them. And you were running out of fuel. So you had to leave, get your crewmate back up, leave, go refuel. Did you consider this might be too dangerous? And are you even allowed to do that? If there are survivors in the mountain, are you allowed to make a call at some point of this is too dangerous for us, we can't do this?
That was probably the hardest part about this mission was we put our rescue swimmer down and he was able to get contact with the firefighters, but unfortunately we ran out of gas before we could hoist any of them up, just because it takes a lot longer to put the litter down for disabled survivors. So when we did have to bring our swimmer back up and leave scene, you could feel it in the aircraft without talking, like everybody was definitely feeling pretty down. And I was also, like you said, I was doubting that once we landed to get gas that our commanding officer would give us the green light again to take back off, just because we weren't able to do it on that first flight. But luckily, we kind of had a pretty good plan because we saw what we were dealing with, that they supported us to go out and try again.
And you wanted to?
Yes. I would say yes, not 100%. There was definitely some reservations. Whenever we go out on any type of flight, the aircraft commander is like my sole priority is to get everybody back safe, and then also try to help people that need it. But it was definitely one of those flights where I was a little nervous about my ability to get everybody back safe.
I will give a spoiler alert that those two survivors are indeed survivors. Julian, were you able to find out what had happened to them post-rescue?
No, nobody really has been able to, interestingly, not quite sure why. There was a quote from I think the guy that owns the company or runs the company, that they were all fine and they're ready to get back in the fight. But I think a lot of us have tried to contact the company, and maybe they're just not really interested in reliving the experience.
Right. Is that, I'm surprised about the kind of lack of, I guess not lack of rescue resources as they were rescued, but the fact that you're dropping, as Derek mentioned, a swimmer down into the mountains. It surprises me that it came to be the Coast Guard. Who are some of the other agencies that were unable, that you would normally call in something like this? I think you mentioned the CHP was contacted, which, we've got the Coast Guard and the Highway Patrol up in the mountains, and it doesn't make sense to me. Isn't there a, I don't know, mountain rescue group?
So up there, the CHP is one of the, pretty much CHP and CAL FIRE, the main search and rescue, like inland agencies up there, as well as the California National Guard. I know the CHP turned it down for the risk. CAL FIRE at the time did not do night, anything after sunset night rescues. And I wasn't sure about the National Guard, what they said, if it was a risk thing or an aircraft availability type thing. But yeah, we were kind of the only show in town.
Wow. And so when you ultimately rescued the survivors, they were put in another helicopter. You brought them to 5 minutes away and they were taken off in another helicopter to receive care. When they're on your helicopter, in the Coast Guard helicopter, do they receive any kind of medical care? I'm specifically asking for the firefighter with the broken femur, who must have been in excruciating pain.
So we did for this, in most circumstances, the rescue swimmer is he's a trained EMT and he can provide medical care. In this case, the the firefighters that were with these two survivors had stabilized them, put them in on a backboard. So we hoisted them up, and then the flight to where we met those the life flight reach helicopters was only about a 5-minute flight. So by the time like our swimmer was back up in the cabin with the survivors, we were pretty much on approach to landing to drop them off with those 2 reach helicopters. So there wasn't much care given that night, but typically on a typical case, he does provide medical care.
I didn't realize that femur injuries could be so dangerous. One of the points, Julian, that you make is that there were 2 people can bleed out from a broken femur, and that this area is particularly has an unfortunate history with rescues. Namely, in 2008, there were 2 unsuccessful rescues. Do a lot of people need rescue from this? Were the ones in 2008 related to wildfires?
They were, yeah.
Yeah.
And why did those not work? Sorry, Julian, go ahead.
Derek, do you want to take that?
I can. So I don't know a lot about those cases, but I do know the one that was another femur fracture, and that was again sort of similar to our case. There was a lot of other agencies that were called first that kind of turned it down, and then the Coast Guard was called last. They took off, but by the time they had gotten the call got there, they hoisted the firefighter, and he unfortunately passed inside the helicopter. He passed away just because of the time it took to get to him. And then the other case was actually a larger helicopter that was able to land up in the mountains and pick up some firefighters. But when they picked him up, again, due to the fire activity and the less dense air up at high altitudes, once they took off, they didn't have enough power and crashed into the trees, and everybody died.
Did you know about this going into this rescue?
No, luckily.
Probably for the best. Wow. And how big is forgive this, I feel like this is a dumb question, but maybe there are others wondering, what kind of helicopter are you flying? How much room is it? You weren't able to rescue the other people the other survivor who were not injured, the firefighters who were not injured. Was that not an option?
No. So yeah, we fly, that air station has it's the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter, and it's the smaller of the Coast Guard rescue helicopters. So for these 2, especially since they were both on backboards, they can't like sit up in a sitting position. They had to be laid down flat. We had to take pretty much all our gear out of the back and slide him back in the tail cone, which is very rare that is done, just to make room for the second survivor to be in the cabin with us. So it was, we wouldn't have had room or enough power to actually take on more weight into the helicopter.
Yeah, they're pretty snug inside. I got to see one up in.
Oh, you got a tour?
Yeah, from the last crew I was writing about, and I mean they're not even really the size of a van, maybe inside. I mean it's snug, right?
It is, yeah.
A van, really?
If that.
They're decent sized helicopters, but the Coast Guard packs a lot of stuff inside the back of them to make them capable for maritime rescues.
And yet nothing, I mean, is there any component to your training that there must, you had mentioned that doing what was it? You had the swimmer go down with the litter. Am I using the right terminology here? Which is not part of your Coast Guard training, but you had seen other organizations do it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I had I credit our rescue swimmer, Graham. He was the one that came up with that idea because he had seen it. And we actually, funny enough, just started training that procedure this past month up in Oregon for the first time. So it was kind of good to see that something that we had kind of done for the first time in the Coast Guard is now being trained to other crews. So they'll have that tool in their tool bag if they ever need to use it on a case.
You had a 4-person crew on this mission. Was it 1 or 2 of them had never been on a rescue before? Wow. What component does teamwork? In Julian's article, you've got your another teammate kind of calling out, tree on your left, redwood on your left or whatever, as you're wearing your night vision goggles and trying not to be blinded by the fire and rescue these people. And it's that hot wind screwing up how you fly the helicopter. Can you talk a little bit about, the trust and the teamwork involved in something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So my co-pilot was pretty new out of flight school. It was his first case since arriving at the unit, and he did a really great job of just backing me up. Was flying over the fire without the night vision goggles working very well was really disorienting, and the aircraft was and myself kind of going all over the place. And he was really good about backing me up, letting me know if I was getting too high or too low, anything like that. And then while we're actually hoisting, just because it took so much of my focus and attention to just keep the helicopter in a hover, he was doing most of the duties that I typically would be doing, like, making sure we have plenty of gas, doing all the flight planning, that sort of thing. He was doing that on his own, which was really impressive. And then our flight mech, Tyler, his first case also, and he's the one that's really kind of directing, once we're in a hover, where I need to hover at to be over the survivors. So he did a great job, like you heard in the video, if you watched it, he was calling out all the trees around us, telling me, where I needed to go and where I needed to hover, so we could pick those guys up. So it was pretty impressive, how they performed on their very first case.
Well, you're being very humble in that your performance was extraordinary and kind of unprecedented. So perhaps Julian could tell us, how was this team recognized by the military for their heroism?
Well, they received the God, what was it called? Remind me, Derek. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the U.S. military's highest aviation award for heroism in flight, and also the air medals for heroism. So, and together they got what's called the Frank Erickson Award for exceptional performance in search and rescue operations. So, yeah, they certainly earned it.
Yeah, I'll say. Now, when you get, do you wear do you have like the medals? Do you get to wear them around, Derek?
It's pretty rare. This is usually what I'm wearing now. It's our flight suit, but our nicer uniforms that we probably wear it 2 to 3 times a year. You wear your medals
Do you
on
get
there.
to display it somewhere and then tell this incredible story when people come over?
No, it's actually, I think, in my closet in my bedroom right now. So
How did your family feel, Derek? I know that you're married, you've got 2 kids. I'm married to a first responder myself, and I would have been livid. But this is, I know that you're a flight instructor now. Are you at the Top Gun of the Coast Guard, by the way? Is that essentially where you are?
I wouldn't call it that, but
Outfit aside.
I wouldn't call it Top Gun, but there's not much room to go up flying wise for me. So I'm kind of,
Congratulations.
thanks.
So how did your kids feel about this rescue? How did your spouse feel about it?
So I think at first they didn't really know what we were going out to do until the next day once we had landed. And I had come home and shown them the video. I told my wife, I always text her after I land, but she didn't really know exactly what had happened until I had got home, and I brought the footage home from our hoist camera, and she was pretty surprised, and I think just glad that we had made it back home.
Sure. Where did you learn to fly? You only fly helicopters?
So I learned to fly before I got into the Coast Guard. My parents helped me out. I got my private pilot's license in like a small Cessna airplane. And then once I joined the Coast Guard, all Coast Guard pilots go to the Navy's flight school in Pensacola, Florida, where they teach you to fly a fixed wing aircraft first, and then you move on to helicopters. So I haven't flown fixed wing in a really long time, but I have before.
What's your favorite air vehicle to fly?
Probably the one I fly now, the 65.
How often do you fly?
Almost every day, at least 3 to
Really?
4 times a week.
Oh, wow. And now you're teaching other people, other future aviators to fly. what is the, other than like, you know, what the instruments do, what is the most important piece of knowledge you feel you give them?
I would just, best thing is just always be humble and never get complacent or overconfident in the aircraft, because that's when bad things can happen. Just always try and be calm, use your crew, and just try to do your best.
Julian, when you were writing about this, did it kind of, you'd said you'd written about with Coast Guard stories first, and they had the Coast Guard coasties, I believe is the term, that had directed you towards this story. Is this one of the most, you've written a lot for Alta and certainly for a number of other publications. Can you talk about why this particular rescue in this story was, I know you worked very hard on it and was so important to you to get right?
I think, I mean, not just the stuff the Coast Guard guys are doing, which is amazing, but combining that with firefighting, you know, which is really an increasing issue, especially here out west. You know, we're getting more and more fires, and they're getting bigger and bigger, and there's going to be more and more people caught in them every year. And you know, even if you have to go to the Coast Guard, we're going to need help. You know, this is going to be more and more of a problem. So yeah, the combination of the two I thought was especially fascinating. And it's always great to work with the Coast Guard folks, because you know, sometimes working with the military, there's a lot of red tape, and there's a lot of, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so and get so-and-so's okay. But the Coast Guard, it's usually like, hey, here's a cell phone number, give them a ring. You call them up, oh yeah, sure, I'll spend an hour telling you about this. And it's just kind of like sitting down over beer and getting the story. And that makes my job easy and interesting.
Are they all this humble?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it in the first place, but if I did, I would brag about it every day.
I think you actually get kicked out of the Coast Guard if you brag.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's not the rule.
I feel like most people would be a hard pass. Sorry about your broken femur, sir, but no. It's the selflessness. People are pointing it out in the comments is extraordinary. Is Christy your wife, Derek?
Yes.
He points out that when Derek first told me he was headed to go help some injured firefighters, I assumed they were injured assisting with a boat fire. She was in complete shock when she finally heard the details, and is incredibly grateful and impressed and proud. That's extraordinary. I'm so impressed with you and so grateful to both of you for joining us today. And of course, Derek, Lieutenant Commander, we are all so grateful for your service and selflessness in rescuing those firefighters. I had hoped to kind of be like, surprise, they're here, and have my Oprah moment, but that was not to be. But maybe one day, you never know. If I can do that, we'll have you back. Julian, amazing article. Again, thank you. And Derek, so grateful to you. Folks, before you go, I remind you that this interview has been recorded and will be emailed to you. We will also, I'd like to invite you all to next week, where we will meet author Laura Gabrielle, who has a new biography on Marion Davies, William Randolph Hearst's longtime mistress, partner, and her biography, her extraordinary life. He will be in conversation with historian Bill Deverell and William Randolph Hearst III, my boss and the publisher of Alta, talking about his grandfather's mistress and her extraordinary life. So please join us for that. That's Wednesday, November 9th, 12:30 here at Alta Live. Again, so grateful to you both. And of course, to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.